At night, the tower is rarely silent. Along with the creaking of old wooden beams and the occasional call of a raven, there is one sound that has baffled guards for centuries. A vault, a fortress, a menagerie, and a prison? There's one place that fills all these roles: the Tower of London, or by its official title, His Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress of the Tower of London. No wonder why they shortened that. The tower itself was founded in 1066 by William the Conqueror, and it has certainly been the center for a lot of history in its time since. It is said to be haunted by at least 13 different ghostly entities, and the first one just may surprise you. Long before London had the now world-famous London Zoo, it was the Tower of London that played host to the various exotic animals that hailed from all over the British Empire. Known as the Royal Menagerie, it wasn't uncommon to see African elephants, lions, and ostriches roaming the ground. For a time, it even played host to a polar bear. And it's from this era our first ghost is believed to come from. Yeah, there's actually a ghostly bear that's said to roam the grounds, usually lurking around the jewel room where the crown jewels themselves reside. Perhaps it's the ghostly guardian of the jewels, carrying out his eternal duty to king and country. But it is often spotted emerging from behind the door of the jewel room, and has even been spotted near Martin Tower. Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Certainly a nefarious entrant on the list of ghostly inhabitants, Guy Fawkes. He was arrested on November 5th, 1605, when he was found in a rented undercroft guarding a large stockpile of gunpowder. King Henry VI was born amidst the turbulent era of the 100 Years' War on December 6, 1421. Henry would begin his reign as King of England on September 1, 1422, and his disputed reign as King of France on October 21, 1422. It wasn't until 1437 he was deemed fit to reign on his own, and by this time, many setbacks in France had harmed the English cause, as well as troubles back home in England proper. Over time, the English lost most of their holdings in France, and in October 1453, Henry abdicated the throne of France to Charles VII. Starting that year, Henry had multiple mental breakdowns that ultimately left him unfit to rule. Queen Margaret of Anjou and the Dukes of York and Somerset all began fierce infighting amongst themselves over the reins of power, ultimately leading to the War of the Roses, which broke out in 1455. Henry would not see the end of the war, however, as he would be assassinated on orders of King Edward IV while being imprisoned within the Tower of London in 1471 at the King's private chapel in the Wakefield Tower. The legend says he was killed somewhere close to midnight, and now at the stroke of midnight, the tragic king's soul appears at Wakefield Tower, forever mourning the loss of his son, his 2 kingdoms, and ultimately his very mind. 9 days a queen, the Protestant Lady Jane Grey found herself a monarch in the wake of Edward's death. He had chosen Lady Jane over his Catholic half-sister. However, after some internal bickering, a council decided that Mary was the rightful sovereign of England, and Lady Jane Grey, alongside her husband Lord Dudley, were executed on the infamous Tower Green in 1554. Her ghostly image is said to still roam the battlements to this day, a pale white figure in the night. Lady Jane is also directly linked to the next entrant on our list. Probably the most widely reported specter on the ground is that of Arabella Stuart, another tragic story of a young woman caught in politicking and infighting. Arabella married the nephew of Lady Jane Grey, William Seymour, without the approval of the crown. As such, James I saw Arabella's pairing with Seymour to be a dangerous match to his reign, and as such, had Arabella imprisoned at the Tower of London. Whether she was intentionally deprived of food or refused to eat, the result was the same, and Arabella died in the tower. Edward and Richard, the young princes. In my opinion, this is one of the most tragic entries here. Edward IV, who had taken the throne from our tragic friend Henry VI, wasn't on the throne long before he died too. His eldest son, the 12-year-old Edward, was crowned as Edward V. Under the regency of his uncle, it wasn't long before the young king and his brother Richard were imprisoned in the Tower, never to be seen again. Only much later were the skeletons of two young boys found buried under a staircase in the Tower. Many stories are told of the mischievous young spirits of two boys often seen playing at various places in the Tower. The spirits mostly seem to be happy ones, despite their tragic fate, and most stories refer to them laughing and playing, sometimes giving unwary guests or staff a scare. When King Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church in the 1530s, culminating with the signing of the Act of Supremacy in 1534, it was not the beginning of the end of political turmoil in England. Quite the opposite. It was merely the end of the beginning, and before all was said and done, there would be a trail of bodies that went far beyond the time of Henry VIII on the throne, as we have already explored with the deaths of Lady Jane Grey and Arabella Stuart. Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury, was one of the only members of her noble house to survive the War of the Roses. However, when her son Cardinal Reginald Pole directly offended King Henry VIII, it was Margaret who would pay the price. Her only crime was being Cardinal Pole's mother. On May 27, 1541, she was brought to the Tower Green, directly west of the White Tower, to be executed by beheading. The story goes that the execution was botched in the worst possible way, and instead of a single clean stroke meant to be painless and, I suppose, dignified, the wretched and blundering youth hacked at her head and shoulders, unable to get one clean slice with its axe. To this day, witnesses claim to hear the agonizing wails and cries of the unfortunate countess echoing off the walls of the grounds, forever trapped in the most brutal moment of her life. Probably the first name that comes to mind when you hear someone bring up the Tower of London. Anne Boleyn was born between 1501 and 1507 in Norfolk. Educated abroad in France and the Netherlands, Anne wouldn't return to her native England until 1522, when she was introduced to wed her cousin, James Butler. However, the arrangement would fall apart, and this would set Anne down the path that ultimately ended at the Tower of London. She found herself a posting as maid to Catherine of Aragon, the wife of King Henry VIII. During this time, around 1523, Anne was secretly betrothed to Henry Percy. However, this arrangement also ultimately fell apart when the Earl refused to support the match in 1524. In 2 years' time, in February or March of 1526, Henry VIII started pursuing Anne, seeking an extramarital affair with her. Anne refused to become his mistress, as her sister Mary had once been. This, however, set the king on a mission to dissolve his marriage with Catherine of Aragon. When the Catholic Church refused to annul the marriage, Henry set out on something of a crusade to break the church in England. He closed monasteries and either claimed the lands for the crown or sold them. This all ended with King Henry signing the Act of Supremacy and declaring himself the head of the Church of England. In January of 1533, Anne and Henry were formally married, and Anne was crowned as queen on June 1st, 1533. And on September 7th, 1533, she gave birth to the future Queen Elizabeth I. The birth of the daughter came as quite the disappointment to Henry, and he hoped greatly to have a son with Anne. Sadly, in the following months, Anne would have 3 miscarriages, and by March of 1536, Henry would be courting Jane Seymour. By April of the same year, Henry was having Anne investigated for high treason, and in May, she was taken by barge along the River Thames of the Tower of London, where she was marched through the Traitor's Gate. She was put on trial, and on May 15, 1536, was found guilty, and 4 days later, on May 19th, was publicly executed by beheading on Tower Green. And this is where things get creepy. 340 years later, a soldier reported spotting a light burning within the closed chapel. He reportedly investigated, and upon looking through the window, saw a procession of knights and fine ladies led by none other than the headless Queen, Anne Boleyn. Okay, so far I've talked about some of the more famous and tragic spirits lurking around the Tower grounds, but there are a few others that are less known about. They've only been encountered a scant few times or just have not been widely documented. Some of them have never really been seen, only heard or sensed. Either way, let's jump into it.
Hello, my beautiful creepy people. It's Editing Danny here. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you so much for watching the video. If you haven't already, please drop a comment, leave a like, and if you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button as it helps my channel to grow. And there's also merch. Alright, now back to the video.
Sir Walter Raleigh, the Tower's defiant prisoner. One of England's most famed explorers and poets was imprisoned in the Tower of London no less than 3 times. His crime? Falling in and out of favor with the monarchy. Initially a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, he fell from grace after secretly marrying one of her ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Throckmorton, without royal consent. This landed him his first stint in the Tower in 1592. His most infamous imprisonment, however, came under King James I. In 1603, he was convicted of plotting against the king in the so-called Main Plot, and was sentenced to death. James, however, decided to commute his sentence, and instead imprisoned Raleigh in the Bloody Tower, where he would remain for 13 years. During this time, he occupied himself with writing and scientific experiments, even attempting to create an elixir of immortality. Legend has it that his quarters in the Tower were turned into a makeshift laboratory filled with strange vials and bubbling concoctions. Raleigh was eventually released in 1616 to undertake an expedition to South America in search of the fabled City of Gold, El Dorado. The mission was a failure, and on his return, he was blamed for an attack on a Spanish outpost, an act that violated a fragile peace treaty. In 1618, he was executed at Westminster Palace. His last words before being beheaded were, "Strike, man, strike!" Allegedly, guards stationed in the Bloody Tower report hearing faint scratching sounds as if someone is still writing with a quill. The shapeless young woman, a spirit without a past. One of the eeriest sightings recorded at the Tower was in 1957, when a young guardsman claimed he encountered a ghostly, shapeless form with the face of a young woman. Unlike other spirits, which often appear in period clothing, this figure was described as indistinct, with only her face truly visible, suspended in what appeared to be a swirling mist. Speculation has linked her to Arabella Stuart, who I mentioned earlier. Some believe her spirit lingers, still searching for the freedom never attained in life. Others think this apparition could belong to one of the many unnamed women who died in the Tower, wives of traitors, forgotten prisoners, or victims of royal schemes. The guardsman who saw her in 1957 reportedly felt an overwhelming sorrow before she disappeared. Visitors have reported sudden temperature drops and feelings of dread in the area when she was sighted. Some believe she occasionally whispers, her voice just barely perceptible, like a sigh carried in the wind. At night, the Tower is rarely silent. Along with the creaking of old wooden beams and the occasional call of a raven, there is one sound that has baffled guards for centuries: the unmistakable shuffle of sandals on stone. This is often heard in the dead of night, echoing through the corridors as though someone is ascending unseen stairs. Many believe this to be the spirit of a medieval monk who once lived at the Tower when it functioned partly as a place of worship. Some says the monk was executed for hearsay, others that he was a loyal servant of the crown who simply never left his sacred duties behind, even in death. A few witnesses have reported seeing a flickering shadow moving along the walls, disappearing before they can get a clear look. Some have experienced a strange peaceful sensation in the presence of this spirit, unlike the fear associated with some of the other hauntings. One of the most chilling and well-documented encounters with a ghost at the tower occurred in 1864. Captain J.D. Dundas, one of the tower's officers, witnessed a yeoman warder charging at an unseen enemy with his bayonet. The warder later claimed that he saw a ghostly white female figure, and in his fright, instinctively lunged at it. His bayonet passed through the apparition, and the ghost faded into the night. Many believe this figure is Anne Boleyn, still wandering the site where she met her tragic end. Others suggest it could be Lady Jane Grey, whose pale spectral form is often seen around the tower. However, no one can really confirm it. Now, the tower's darkest secret is called the Nameless Thing. While many of the tower spirits are linked to historical figures, there is one entity that remains a complete enigma. Known simply as the Nameless Thing, this spirit is considered one of the most terrifying presence in the tower. First reported by guards patrolling the Sally Port near the River Thames, the entity does not take a human shape. It does not speak. It does not behave like other ghosts. Instead, it follows people. Witnesses describe an overwhelming sense of fear, as though something is just out of sight. The hairs on the back of their neck stand up. The temperature plummets and the silence becomes suffocating. But when they turn around, nothing is there. Some speculate that this entity is an accumulation of centuries of fear, suffering, and death, a sort of spiritual residue that has taken on a life of its own. Others believe it could be an unidentified prisoner or a tortured soul that never left. Now, allegedly, some people claim to hear a low growling or breathing coming from the darkness, and a former guard reported seeing his own shadow move in the opposite direction, as if something else was mirroring him. The Tower of London has stood for nearly 1,000 years, a silent witness to history's darkest moments. Walking through its stone corridors, it's easy to feel the weight of the past pressing in, as if the very walls hold memories of those who once lived and died within them. There's something so unsettling about the tower. Maybe it's the way the air seems to hum with unseen energy, or how the silence at night never truly feels empty. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing is certain: the Tower of London holds secrets that time has not erased. The past lingers here, just beneath the surface, waiting for those who dare to listen. After all, the tower keeps its secrets, and its ghosts, they never rest.